So a while back, I made my, I guess, semi-annual most underrated player on each team video, but because of the circumstances revolving around the season at the time, I never managed to get my most overrated player on every team video done, and it's the dead of the off season and nothing is going on, so I figured let's go ahead and get that done. Before I get into today's video, if you end up enjoying it, please be sure to subscribe. Also drop a like. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference in how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Right before I get into this video, I want to talk about what I actually even mean by overrated. This is just the type of video that's going to inherently be more negative than my most underrated video because it's criticism rather than praise, and as much as I like to be negative, it doesn't mean I like spreading negative content that much. So to be clear, these are by no means attacks on these players. How appropriately a player is rated is entirely determined by factors outside of themselves. It's not a player's fault that they are underrated, and it's not a player's fault if they are overrated. Now, how can a player be overrated? Well, there are really 3 sources: how fans talk about the players, how the media talks about the players, and how franchises treat these players. You know, giving X player X amount of money from a team could be an indication that that player is overrated because you don't believe they're worth that, and so on. Also, last but not least, with me having to make a pick for every team, the degree in which these guys are overrated varies entirely. It's not, you know, a list in order of most overrated players, but if there was a list, these guys would all make it. For the Milwaukee Bucks, I have to go with Drew Holiday. Now, the irony of this is that I do think at this point by fans, he is not overrated, but I do think the franchise probably believes in and relies on him a little bit too much. And simply put, I think if you're a regular season player who puts up a really good regular season numbers and then you just disappear in the playoffs, you're the type of guy that I'm just kind of inherently gonna think is overrated, and he is very much one of those guys. For the Celtics, I have to go Jaylen Brown. Now, the irony of this is I do think Jaylen has become fairly underrated by his fan base. He doesn't really have a lot of love in Boston, it seems, at least according to Twitter. But that said, he is making a shitload of money, and I routinely see people rank him higher than I would have ranked him even before that shitload of money. I always felt as though Jaylen this last season was more so playing in a contract year rather than he actually had improved that dramatically. For the Sixers, this one, I technically have to go Joel Embiid because I literally can't think of anybody else who would be overrated. I mean, no one's overrating James Harden right now. Everyone thinks James Harden sucks. And Joel Embiid, I don't even like this answer. I really don't, because he's at this point, he is not underrated because everyone has properly jumped on the hater bandwagon. And at this point, he might actually reach the threshold of underrated before we're too far down the line. But that said, who is rating anybody on the Sixers besides for Joel Embiid? For the Cavaliers, I begrudgingly and unfortunately have to go with Evan Mobley. Evan Mobley is just really not it as an offensive player. I don't mean to suggest that he can't ever be it, but he doesn't really seem to have the wiring in his head to be an aggressive offensive guy. And ultimately, if he ends up being like this generational defensive prospect, but just a 15 point per game scorer perpetually, that would be a pretty big disappointment, and especially relative to the hype that his potential gets. Overrated. For the New York Knicks, I'm gonna go with Mitchell Robinson. A lot of Knicks fans seem to think this guy is like a secret star player in disguise. You know, to be fair, he seems to believe that himself, but Mitchell Robinson is a fine enough starting big man, ideally an excellent backup, but a solid starter, and that's about it. And I see people talk about him like he's like an all defensive guy, or that he has far more offensive potential than he has when he literally has taken like 1 shot out of the paint in his entire career and it was an air ball. He's not that good. For the Brooklyn Nets, I'm gonna go with Cam Johnson, and I don't even necessarily think that Cam Johnson is overrated by fans, and especially not the media. The media is not saying dick about Cam Johnson, but the amount of money that they gave him given his injury-prone past makes me think that the Brooklyn Nets kind of overrated him to a degree that is, you know, understandable because in the position they're in, they're at a talent deficit. They kind of have to keep what they can, and and by paying Cam Johnson probably like, I don't know, $6-7 million more per year than he's probably worth. It's just kind of a necessary evil, but that said, ultimately makes him appear the most overrated player on the team to me. For the Atlanta Hawks, I'm gonna go with Clint Capella. Yet again, a player that is fairly overrated mostly by the franchise. I think to most people, Onyeka Okongwu appears, if not a better player, at least on a similar enough tier to be worth getting the starting spot given that he is younger and cheaper, but they have not done that. They seem committed to sticking with the okayness of Clint Capella being your starting center, and it's a little disappointing. And you know, to some of the fan base, maybe they might overrated him a little bit just because, again, between that him and Onyeka thing, some fans might think Onyeka ain't ready, and I just strongly disagree, and I think a lot of that comes down to them thinking Capella is just somebody that he wasn't. Capella had one season with the Atlanta Hawks where he was excellent and like in Defensive Player of the Year conversations, even if I remember correctly, but since then he's just been a pretty good starting center that is treated by this franchise like just the most unquestioned position on the team other than point guard. For the Miami Heat, I'm going to go with Tyler Hero. Tyler is someone that in the discussions I have seen about him specifically revolving around, of course, the Damian Lillard trade. Do you guys know who this guy is? Because I've seen people talk about him like he has like perennial all-star, all-NBA type potential. When to me, I look at Tyler Hero and I see a really good scoring punch, you know, like a roided up Jordan Clarkson, and that's really his peak potential. I'm saying that because Jordan Clarkson this year averaged basically the same shit that Tyler Hero did this year. The guy has no discernible significant skills outside of scoring the ball, and for me personally, I have come to the conclusion that if all you can do is score, not a fan. For the Toronto Raptors, I have nobody because everybody on that team is either underrated or neutral, so didn't make a pick for them. For the Chicago Bulls, I went with Zach LaVine. Speaking of guys that can only score, Zach LaVine is at least a far better scorer than Tyler Hero is, but his playmaking is ass, his defense is ass, his overall impact outside of anything besides for putting the ball in the basket is ass. And I used to be a staunch defender of Zach, but at this point, I just can't do it anymore. I've seen enough of him just be the problem that I can't ignore it anymore. I think your impact on the game of basketball, if all you're doing is getting buckets and then just being a complete zero in every other area, it's not a significant impact. And if it was, maybe the Chicago Bulls wouldn't be so dog shit. For the Indiana Pacers, weirdly enough, I'm gonna go with Benedict Mathurin. This is yet another example of like, I don't really have a great choice here, so I had to pick somebody. And for Benedict, I've seen a couple of people talk about him and his potential. Again, this is more of a potential conversation where like, again, I'm like, I don't know if I see this to the degree that you guys do. I think he's, again, somebody who can score the ball pretty well. I'm not gonna write off a potential all-around game going forward because he just played his rookie year, but he didn't necessarily impress me in areas outside of scoring. And for that reason, little overrated, but that's it. For the Washington Wizards, I gotta preface this, Rudy, please do not kill me. I'm gonna go with Tyus Jones, and full stop. Tyus Jones is excellent. Tyus Jones is one of the best role players in the entire league. My issue where I see him become overrated is within a certain group of these NBA nerds who, you know, like Tyus Jones more than they like a poster dunk type beat, like a Tyus Jones nice solid assist. But Tyus Jones is a role player. That's what he is. It's what he's meant to be. A very, very good one, but ultimately a role player. And I see people say like, oh, he's gonna go to the Wizards and he's gonna be averaging like 20 and 10, and it's like, nah, I don't think his brain is wired that way as a player. I think he's too risk adverse in order to take the necessary risks to be a star player. You know, if you're going to be a star level player, there is a certain degree of like putting yourself out there that has to happen. And Tyus very much seems to me like somebody that is content with his 10 points, his 6 assists, and his 1 turnover at most. For the Orlando Magic, I guess I'm going to to have to go with Paulo. Again, this is kind of coming down to like, who else are you gonna fucking pick? Paulo just, I think his rookie year overall was a little overrated because, again, bringing this back to the conversation, scoring. He scored not even that efficiently. His playmaking is good. Don't get me wrong. He has a lot of really good playmaking chops, and I think as a defender, he wasn't bad by any means. Not great either, but not bad. But his overall impact was not that significant, I don't think. And I don't even think he should have won Rookie of the Year. I personally picked Jalen Williams. For the Charlotte Hornets, I'm going to go Kelly Oubre. I don't think Kelly Oubre is very good. And I'm giving you this perspective from the point of view of someone who has seen a lot of Kelly Oubre in person. Whenever I watch him with the Hornets, it like disgusts me. The way that he plays, the bad shots, the bad decision making overall, the complete tunnel vision. Defensively, he doesn't even really bring it like that. Overall, I just don't think, for an 18 point per game guy or whatever he's at right now, because I know he was at that at one point, just not as impactful as you would like him to be. He obviously really sucked on the Warriors, but a lot of those tendencies still very much exist with him on the Charlotte Hornets. And unfortunately, the Hornets exist within an offense where the mediocrity of his play style, or the not even goodness of his play style, is ultimately rewarded because that's kind of just the whole package. Everyone's like that on that team, so he doesn't really stand out like a sore thumb. For the Pistons, I'm gonna go with James Wiseman, more specifically by the Pistons front office, because they're like obsessed with this guy. Back when the draft happened, they really wanted to get him, and then after they saw an opportunity, when they already had Jalen Duren, who was showing signs of being an excellent big man, Isaiah Stewart, who had shown signs of being a really solid big man, they still trade for him, and then now they're trying to possibly put him in the lineup at the 4. It's a disaster. It's a horrible idea, and I hate it, and I wish the Pistons would just fucking embrace Jalen Duren. Let's move on to the Western Conference now. For the Denver Nuggets, I have to go with Michael Porter Jr., just simply based on one thing, which is regularly I hear people say that he's better than Aaron Gordon, say that he's Denver's 3rd best player and so on. That's not true. And it seems obvious to me, but Michael Porter Jr. has a more flashy game. He was obviously more hyped prospect, but Aaron Gordon is a hell of a player and was quite easily the 3rd best player for Denver this year. And the fact that that was even remotely in question to your average NBA fan says a lot about him being a little overrated. For the Memphis Grizzlies, I'm going to go with Steven Adams. He's just been consistently not really a reliable option in the playoffs. I hear Rudy talk about Steven Adams as though he's like some guy to bank on, and in reality, he's just a little too slow defensively in the playoff setting, and then offensively speaking, he's obviously limited because he can't space the floor. Other than rebounding, other than solid screen setting, he's really not contributing all that much. And I say that as someone who really likes Steven Adams, like as a person and as a player when he was closer to his peak than he is right now. For the Sacramento Kings, I'm gonna go with Domantas Sabonis. I've seen a lot of people like say Sabonis is like the 3rd best center in the league after the most obvious picks being Embiid and Jokic. I don't think he's nearly as good as like Bam Adebayo, for example, especially out of the center position. I dock you a lot of points when you're poor defensively, and unlike Jokic, Sabonis actually is bad at defense. Gotta dock him a couple of points, and I see people consistently put him higher on lists than I would even think to put him. For the Phoenix Suns, I have to go Kevin Durant. Of course, this is not a shock to anybody who's been around this channel for a while. I'm probably going to make a video at some point that's like an in-depth why I think Kevin Durant is overrated, because at this point, it's like, it's very much something that I have so many thoughts on, and I'm always constantly giving a little bit of it in each video. And I'd rather just, I don't want just a taste of them. I want the full load. Oh man, I'm a child. For the Clippers, I'm gonna go with Bones Highland. I don't really have a strong reason other than just, I don't know, I saw a couple of Nuggets fans hype him when he was in Denver, and he had shown some shot creation ability, but if you can create shots but they don't go in, what difference does that fucking make? So yeah. For the Warriors, I'm gonna go with Jonathan Kuminga. People are always talking about how he's been restricted within Golden State's system and by Steve Kerr, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think he has far more potential than Steve has given him any credit for. for. So it's definitely not the franchise that's overrating Kuminga in this instance, but I do think that to some extent Kuminga not playing as much has made people overrate him, in that he's always in the most ideal circumstances for him for the most part, which, you know, gives him the opportunity to play his best. But if you took that and then played him 34 minutes a game, I don't know if it would translate nearly as well. I feel like if we're gonna harp on any young player being screwed by Steve Kerr, I would go with Moses Moody. Moody has been given, I think, I don't know about more opportunity, but at least when it comes to being entrusted in the most serious moments, it seems like Moody consistently gets that over Kuminga. But between the two, like, Moody is the less fun player, he's the less exciting player, but I think he's the far more effective player. I think he's the far more ready to contribute to winning player. Kuminga is a little bit overrated by his own fan base. For the Lakers, this one breaks my heart, but I have to go with Jared Vanderbilt. It's insane how much this actually pains me. I love Jared Vanderbilt, man. He's one of my favorite role players in the entire league, but he can't score worth shit, and it has made him really impossible to play big time minutes in a playoff setting. As a result, Rui Hachimura kind of got his spot. It's depressing, but it's true, and I'm not going to sit here and lie to you about it. For the Timberwolves, I'm going to go with Karl Anthony Towns. Am I? I don't know if Cat's overrated. I don't know. A lot of people hate on him now. We'll just say nobody for the Timberwolves. I don't even think that's fair to Karl. For the Pelicans, I am going to go with CJ McCollum. CJ is cool, and that's about it. But I don't know that he's like, I don't even like that pick either. I don't like this. Why am I doing this? I don't like calling these players overrated. CJ McCollum really sucked to open last year, but he got so much better as the year went along. And I don't know, I feel bad, and I feel weird about him as a player because of that inconsistency. But I don't know. I don't know if he's actually really overrated by anybody. For the Timberwolves, I'm going to go with Lou Dort, and this is for basically anybody outside of the Thunder fan base. I don't think there's that many Thunder fans that really fuck with Lou Dort like that anymore. He obviously broke out onto the scene in a very exciting and interesting fashion, but for the most part, he shoots too much, and his defensive impact is a little overrated. And he's fine, don't get me wrong, but I feel like if you ask a non-Thunder fan about the Thunder, Lou Dort is a name that's going to come up before Jalen Williams, and that's a fucking travesty. For the Mavericks, I guess Maxi Kleber. Sometimes you gotta just make a stretch happen here. I don't fucking know. For the Utah Jazz, I'm going to go with Colin Sexton. Now, I don't think Sexton's particularly overrated right now, but he always was, and if anything, I'm just feeling a little vindicated in the proof of that. I always felt like when he was in Cleveland, like, yeah, cool, he's putting up 20 points per game or 23 points per game even. But if you're a 6-foot guard that 3-point shooting wise shoots a high percentage but does not shoot a high volume, that's an important distinction. And you're also not a very talented playmaker. If you have that going for you, I don't really care what you can do inside the 3-point line as a scorer, as a slasher, as a mid-range shooter, whatever. If you're not a high volume 3-point shooter and you're not a good playmaker as a 6-foot guard, you're not going to be a very impactful player. That's the deal if you're that small. It's just the reality. For the Portland Trailblazers, another one that kind of pains me, but not as much as you might think. That's Jeremy Grant. Overpaid by the franchise, probably overrated by a few people. And I think one way that I can definitely highlight that Jeremy Grant is overrated is, do you guys think Jeremy's improved over the past few years? Because I don't. I think Jeremy has taken more shots. I think he's maybe gotten a little bit better at taking more shots, and he's probably gotten a little bit more efficient from 3. But overall, the direction his play style has gone has been a negative direction as far as I am concerned. He has become a worse player because he tried to be bigger than himself. And Jeremy Grant on the Denver Nuggets, Jeremy Grant on the OKC Thunder, in terms of actual impact, I felt like he was better in that regard. Don't get me wrong, it's nice that Jeremy can hit a face-up mid-range shot every once in a while, but what's not nice is that it's not every once in a while that he's attempting that. I've kind of stopped being a big fan of Jeremy as he got more ambitious with his play style. I understand why he did it. It ultimately ended up making him more money. I'm not mad at him for it, get your money, but ultimately kind of ruined a role player that I was a big fan of. For the Rockets, this one doesn't pain me. Dylan Brooks, who is genuinely terrible as far as I'm concerned. Like, I feel a lot of people talk about Dylan like they're like, oh, he has all these negative attributes, but there really is no but with me. The only but that exists is if he stopped shooting shots like a complete jackass, he would be a competent and contributing role player, but I don't see that shit ever happening. And that said, $20 million a year for a player that I genuinely think is one of the worst 25 plus minutes per game guys in the entire league, disgusting. And for the San Antonio Spurs, this is the last pick and also the last and only, I think, the second rookie. I'm gonna go with Jeremy Sohan. Don't get me wrong, I don't think he's like bad or anything, because I know there's a weirdly large group of people that kind of hate on Jeremy. I guess that's in part because he has a tendency to like talk some shit on social media, and then people see him talk shit on social media and then go look at his stats on Basketball Reference and then just completely throw out all nuance about him as a basketball player. He seems to be a very impactful defensive guy and a more talented playmaker than you would expect out of a forward, and a decent enough connector offensively. His jump shot will really determine how valuable of a role player he proves to be, but right now the jump shot looks broken. So you know, I think some Spurs fans talk about him like he's like guaranteed some like future reliable high tier role player, even beyond that, some of them, and I just don't see that. He's a good player, a solid young player that has upside, and if his jump shot comes around, he will genuinely be a very high impact guy, but I have my doubts as to if that will actually happen. So yeah, shout out to Rudy for editing this video, but that is it. Goodbye.